So we have some major new developments in one of the most important rifle and magazine ban cases that's going on right now in the country. And a key argument that was helping this challenge to move forward and to challenge these laws has now disappeared. A decision that was being used to prove that these state bans are unconstitutional is now off the table. So let's break down what happened and where this case goes from here. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply by subscribing. You can also hit the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. Also, I want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is First Form. You guys know that First Form is an amazing company. They're pro-freedom, pro-America. They support the Second Amendment and what we talk about here on the channel. But also they have amazing supplements and apparel. So if you're trying to get healthier, if you're working out more this year like me, I've been trying to work out more, stay on top of my nutrition. I've already lost 25 plus pounds since the beginning of the year. And a lot of the supplements and apparel that I use actually comes from First Form. So if you guys are interested in something like that, I highly recommend that you check out First Form using the links down below. And right now, if you use that link and order any supplements, you can get a free 5-pack of protein sticks. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a critical rifle and magazine ban case coming out of the state of New Jersey, which is currently simply waiting for the Third Circuit en banc panel to issue their ruling. But quickly, let's talk about what's going on in this case and some new developments in this challenge, which may impact how the Third Circuit rules on this issue. Now, like I mentioned, this case challenges New Jersey's ban on so-called assault weapons and magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. Now, the Third Circuit already took these two consolidated cases en banc, held oral arguments, and also in this case, the Trump DOJ actually stepped in, supporting the plaintiffs, arguing that this state ban needs to actually be struck down. Now, the court here in those arguments already appeared deeply divided on this issue, and maybe that there was some support to actually strike down the state ban. So this case was already a major one, but now the stakes just actually went up. As we've covered before, the plaintiffs in this New Jersey case filed a supplemental brief telling the court about the recent Benson ruling out of Washington, D.C. Now, that D.C. ruling essentially held that magazines over 10 rounds are protected arms, that they're in common use, and that there is no historical tradition of supporting these state bans. So the plaintiff's message in this New Jersey case was that another court has already struck down a magazine ban, and that supports their position here against New Jersey's. But now we have a major change on that issue. The DC Court of Appeals has officially granted a rehearing en banc in the Benson case and vacated that prior ruling. That means that the ruling striking down the magazine ban is no longer binding precedent. It's actually been blocked. And now New Jersey has quickly moved to file a new supplemental letter to the Third Circuit en banc panel telling them exactly that. And now here's where New Jersey's current position becomes a little bit more aggressive. They're no longer just saying that Benson is wrong. They're now saying that Benson doesn't count at all, should not be considered anymore, and that the rehearing will likely support their position that the state magazine bans are constitutional. So in the supplemental letter, New Jersey states to the court that plaintiffs previously submitted a letter to this court urging it to align with the decision of the DC Court of Appeals in Benson versus the United States. This week, the DC Court of Appeals vacated that panel decision and set the case for en banc consideration. Thus, a decision for plaintiffs in this case would not only contradict the unanimous position of other courts and other circuits, which this court is reluctant to do, but also it rendered the Third Circuit an outlier among our nation's appellate courts writ large. This court should reach the same conclusion as the 6 sister circuits that New Jersey's assault weapons and LCM laws are constitutional. So in this supplemental letter, New Jersey argues that if the Third Circuit were to rule for the plaintiffs right here and now, it would not just conflict with other circuit courts, it would also make the Third Circuit the single outlier on this issue. They even cite prior to Third Circuit precedent emphasizing that the court is reluctant to break from the consensus of other circuit courts when it comes to magazine bans. Now, this ties directly into New Jersey's next argument. New Jersey is now telling the court that there is no circuit split to rely on because the only other major decision striking down magazine bans has now been vacated. So from their perspective, every relevant federal appellate court has upheld these types of laws, and therefore the Third Circuit should do the same. Now, even with all of that, the key point is essentially that the core arguments in this case have not actually changed. Benson coming in and now actually being taken out doesn't decide this case and doesn't actually impact the merits issue. The Third Circuit already heard full briefing and oral arguments en banc even before Benson, so this is going to be decided based on the record, based on those arguments that were presented, and how the court applies Heller and Bruin. And during those oral arguments, a few things became very clear. The plaintiffs leaned heavily on common use, arguing that these firearms and magazines are widely owned and therefore protected. But several judges pushed back on whether numbers alone are enough, while the state argued that even commonly owned weapons can still be restricted if they are considered unusually dangerous. At the same time, the court spent a lot of time on history, which is critical under Bruin. The state of New Jersey pointed to historical regulations trying to justify these restrictions, while the plaintiffs emphasized that those laws regulated how weapons were used, just not outright banning the possession of them. So those are two very different things that they tried to point out to the court. And that's really what this case now comes down to, whether common ownership and lawful use control the analysis, or whether the state can justify these bans based on perceived danger. So even though Benson is now out of the picture, it doesn't change the core of this fight. The Third Circuit already has everything that it needs to rule on this case, and ultimately they will decide on the merits of these arguments, and they're not going to rely just exclusively on what a different court did. But now with Benson being reheard en banc, this New Jersey case is kind of the next major rifle and magazine ban challenge pending a decision, and there is a strong chance that the Third Circuit could rule in our favor. That, of course, would also put a lot of pressure and a ton of pressure really on the Supreme Court to finally have to step in and resolve this issue nationally. We have received some favorable two-way rulings out of the Third Circuit in the past, so there is a potential that we could get something like that, even if it's narrow in this case. So this New Jersey case just became even more important. The plaintiffs brought in Benson to strengthen their argument, but now that decision has been vacated, it's off the table, and New Jersey is quickly telling the court to ignore it entirely and also potentially use it as a rationale to uphold New Jersey's rifle and magazine bans. And now the Third Circuit has to decide which direction it wants to go, and depending on how they rule, this could still play a major role in whether the Supreme Court eventually has to step in on these issues. So that's the latest update in the ANJRPC/Cheeseman case dealing with rifle bans and magazine bans in a state like New Jersey. The Third Circuit en banc panel has already heard arguments in this case. We're just simply waiting on a ruling. And again, that's going to be a critical ruling which could shape how this magazine ban and rifle ban issue kind of plays out nationally. So as we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.